Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to UELtras here on Ranks FC. It's the show that looks at the Europa League and the Europa Conference League, both of Europe's most exciting club competitions. And after an incredible set of games in the first legs of these playoff ties, we're set for an incredible, dramatic, exciting second legs on Thursday evening. I can't wait to get stuck into them. We're going to change things up a little bit on today's UELtras. I'm going to start with games to watch because we had a question from one of our patrons. A reminder, if you want to get involved, help shape this show and ask the questions, as well as getting a couple of extra shows a week from us on Ranks FC. There's a link to the Patreon in the description. We'd love to have you on board in our wonderful football community that we've cultivated over on the Patreon. Going to start with this from Valdemar Isaacson. He said, could you perhaps start off this time by naming the games to watch out for and why? So it's easier to find out which game I want to watch on Thursday. I can do one better than that, Valdemar. I'm going to work through 9 games here. 5 in the Europa League, 4 in the Europa Conference League, 2 earlies in each, 3 late games in the Europa League, and 2 late games in the Conference. And we'll start off in the Europa League with Qarabag Braga, which is one of the early games. 4-2 to Qarabag in the first leg, which was in Braga. And that was the biggest shock, I think, of these first legs. Qarabag went to Opedreira, the quarry, and beat Braga 4-2. To be honest, it could have been worse. João Moutinho's late penalty breathing some sort of life into the Portuguese side ahead of their trip to Azerbaijan. Braga had given away a silly penalty in the first half, which made it 1-0. It did look like they'd steadied the ship when they equalised just before halftime. Simon Banza, their top scorer, coming back from AFCON and firing this one in from close range. And yet, in the second half, they completely collapsed, conceded 3 times in 14 minutes. Fundamentally, Braga completely the cause of their own downfall. They just kept giving the ball away in the midfield, and it just kept coming back at them and back at them. They had no way of stemming the tide. That late penalty reignited a faint flame of hope, but this is a long journey. They're in for a tough test, and they really, really need to start fast here. It's a lock-in for the one I'm going to tune into early on, at least unless Qarabag score first, in which case it's probably a done deal. Braga struggled past Firenze at the weekend, and they've been defensively porous all season. I can't see them keeping a clean sheet here. And with a buoyant Qarabag side playing in front of their own fans, they could continue making history, the first Azerbaijani side ever to reach the last 16 of the Europa League. So I think it's going to be too much for Braga, but if they get the first goal here, could be very, very exciting. Going to move on to a second early game in the Europa League. This is going to be Freiburg against Lens. It's the other one worth keeping an eye on, not necessarily because it was a particularly enjoyable first leg, but because there's really not much between these two teams. And I think this one could well go the distance. Freiburg have been quite leaky of late, so to keep a clean sheet will have given them some confidence. And their home form in this competition was excellent back in the autumn. That said, it's been 23 years since the club won a knockout game in European competition. So that particular record will need to end if they're going to continue their campaign here. I hope they do, personally, mostly because their stadium is called Europa Park, and that seems particularly fitting for this competition. On the other side of this, Lens haven't been great on the road either. 14 games without a win in European competition, although it is worth noting, as with Freiburg and that stat earlier, that there are big gaps in their participation in continental football. For Freiburg, Ritsu Doan feels like he could be the difference maker. He's returned from the Asian Cup in good form. He was the best player on the park, I thought, in the first leg of this one. And he scored in Freiburg's 3-3 draw with Eintracht Frankfurt at the weekend. More on Eintracht a little bit later. And yet, Lens rested a number of key players at the weekend, so they'd be fresh for this one. They really do seem to be concentrating on European competition. El Yawahi, in particular, will be raring to go after being left on the bench for their draw with Chaim at the weekend. So there truly isn't much between these two sides. We could be in for extra time and penalties down in the Black Forest. Going to come on now to the late games. Going to start with Marseille and Shakhtar Donetsk. A fair shout for the nuttiest game of last Thursday. These two drawing 2-2 in Hamburg, where the Ukrainian side are playing their home games this season due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Twice Marseille took the lead, and twice they were immediately pegged back by Shakhtar. They took 4 minutes to level things up after Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang had given Marseille the lead, and then 3 minutes to do it a second time once Iliman Ndiaye thought he'd won the game for the visitors. He scored in the 90th minute, and then Shakhtar pulled one back again in the 93rd, leaving this one really nicely balanced. I said before last week's game that I thought this one had goals in it, and I think exactly the same here. Added to by the fact that Marseille have sacked Gennaro Gattuso as head coach this week and replaced him with Jean-Louis Gasset, who was the 70-year-old last seen as the Ivory Coast head coach in the group stages of AFCON when they nearly crashed out, suffered a record home defeat, only for his replacement to re-galvanize the group and go on to win the entire tournament. It's not the replacement that I would have gone for, but when again have Marseille ever made sensible footballing decisions? They haven't won a game in their last 7 in all competitions, which is probably why Gattuso was sacked. And in fact, their only win of 2024 came against 5th-tier club Thionville Lusitanos in the Cup. Even that was only 1-0. They struggled through that game. With all that said, they are 13 games without a loss at the Velodrome, and their autumnal home form in this competition was the reason they got through a tough group that also contained Brighton, like Athens, and an admittedly out-of-sort Ajax. This is another one that could go the distance, but I think you'd have to be mad to try and predict what's going to happen at the home of the most chaotic club in football. I think we can, though, expect fireworks. Probably less so in Rome, because we're doing this one more time. Wheel it up. Roma and Feyenoord meet for the 5th time in 20 months in European competition, with their tie at the Olympico nicely balanced after a 1-1 draw in that first leg at the Kuip. Feyenoord are almost certainly sick of the sight of the Giallorossi. They beat them in the Conference League final in 2022. They knocked them out of this competition in last year's semi-finals, and they're favourites to dump them out of Europe again with the second leg in Rome. And fun fact, Roma also knocked Feyenoord out of the time they were in Europe before that, 2014-15 Europa League, back when there was a round of 32. The Olympico, basically, has not been a happy hunting ground for that side from Rotterdam. Still, they were the better side at the Kuip, and they'll be buoyed by that. They created numerous opportunities to win the game, and having their opponents on the run for quite a lot of this, especially the last 20 minutes or so, felt a bit like a siege on the Roma goal. And thought it was interesting that under De Rossi, Roma have been more attacking, looser, I think, in terms of possession, but also they kind of went back to type, Mourinho type, for the last bit of this game. We're just able to, build that siege mentality on the edge of their own box and keep Feyenoord at bay even just. Plus, for Feyenoord, Santi Jimenez will return to lead the line from the start. He was only fit enough to be on the bench last week. And both Quentin Timber and Luciano Gertruda should return as well. On the Roma side of things, since Daniele De Rossi took over from Jose Mourinho, Roma felt like they're in a good place. A 4-2 loss to Inter, where they ran the champions-elect as close as anyone of late, is their only defeat. And the freedom and fluidity that De Rossi has his side playing with feels like the winds of change are blowing through that famous old club. Mourinho's famously quoted as saying that poets don't win trophies, and his European success feels like a high benchmark for this side to try and emulate. But Roma are firmly growing into themselves again, I think. They're back in the race for the Champions League, and Lorenzo Pellegrini in particular has refound some of the form that made him such a crucial player in the seasons gone by, playing in a slightly more withdrawn role and having that freedom to kind of explode out of midfield and make things happen. Those bursts into the edge of the box. I really love watching Pellegrini when he's in this kind of form, and De Rossi just seems to have unlocked that again. Hey, look, a son of Rome, captain in the club, unlocking a son of Rome, captain in the club. It's all very pleasant in terms of narrative. But the other thing is just try and stop Romelu Lukaku in this competition. He scored 21 times in his last 18 games in the Europa League, only failing to find the net on one occasion. On that basis alone, I'm going to plump for a Roma win here, but I think this should be another excellent game. Coming on to Sparta Prague versus Galatasaray. In the first leg, Mauro Icardi's late winner meant that Galatasaray head to Prague with a narrow lead over Sparta, leading 3-2 after that first leg in Istanbul. And it was a frenetic, breathless encounter. Sparta had the better of the opening exchanges before being caught on the hop by Kerem Demirbay, who shot whistled past the keeper at the near post and, to be honest, should probably have been saved. Sparta equalised through a wonder strike from Preciado, fell behind again to a Dries Mertens shot that was deflected past the keeper, and then equalised again once Galatasaray had been reduced to 10 men. but were then reduced to 10 men themselves and fell to Icardi's wizardry from the edge of the box right at the death. Those 2 red cards and the 5 goals, I think, means that this goes down as the most Europa League game that we've seen so far this season. And basically what I want to say is more of the same, please, lads. Both involved in title races at the top of the league, so little quarter given in terms of rotations at the weekend. But it's worth bearing in mind that Gala have been quite bad on the road this year in Europe, with the big exception of that win at Old Trafford. But hey, everyone was winning at Old Trafford at that point. I'm going to go for an entertaining, high-scoring draw, with Gala going through by the skin of their teeth. But if you're looking for chaos, this is the late game that I'd be picking in the Europa League. And that takes us on to the Conference League, where we're going to start with Bødo Glimt against Ajax. How do you solve a problem like Ajax? The side from Amsterdam somehow salvaged a draw from the first leg, despite being 2-0 down as the clock ticked into the red. Glimt's extended winter break and maybe a slight lack of full match fitness might have played into that a little bit, but it does leave this one beautifully poised for us. So you need a reason to watch? Well, Ajax have scored and conceded in their last 14 games. And on the great equaliser of Glimt's artificial pitch in the middle of the Arctic Circle, you'd bet your house on that happening again. They've also failed to win in their last 4, and with one of football's more notoriously difficult destinations in front of them, I think Johan van Schip is probably under immense pressure if they get knocked out here. And it's a bit of a coin toss if they will be or not. Ajax were chasing shadows when Glimt hit them on the break in the first leg, living up to, well, the Glimt tag. Bødo is a place, Glimt means lightning, and those lightning strikes on the Ajax goal, very much how they took that 2-0 lead. But on paper, Ajax have a far superior team than their opponents. I just can't shake the feeling that Ajax go crashing out here of a tournament they would have been frustrated to drop down to in the first place, but would have seen as a real opportunity of silverware in a difficult season. I think it's a cannot miss. Talking of problems, going to come on to Dinamo Zagreb against Betis. How about my beloved Betis, who achieved maybe the most Manca Piedra performance imaginable? They dominated the game against Dinamo Zagreb at the Via Marine, contrived not to create any clear-cut chances of note, and then conceded a penalty due to one of the most wild, insane decisions I've seen from a defender across this season. It's just Betis things, I guess. I'm not going to pretend to call this one. I wouldn't be shocked if Betis won 4-0 at the Maximir. I wouldn't be shocked if they meekly concede early on and the game ends 1-0. It's a team in flux, which makes Los Verdiblancos incredibly unpredictable. And without Isco in the mix, there's no real lightning rod for the obvious ability in the side to play through. The Maximir is an incredibly difficult place to go. It's raucous and overwhelming, and it's been the dagger to the heart of teams more cohesive than Betis down the years. But this one's unpredictable and fun, and I'm excited to see it play out, even if my confidence in Betis going through isn't all that high right now. We'll come on to the late games. I'm going to start with Eintracht Frankfurt against Union Saint-Gilloise. 2-2 after the first leg. And look, when Eintracht took a 2-goal lead in Belgium in the early stages of this game, I think everybody expected to see it out. And look, bear on that word expectation. I'm going to hear it a lot. I think the expectation was that they would make sure that the second leg at home was a formality. But that's not how Eintracht operate. They conceded twice to set up an interesting encounter in the second leg at the very least back in Frankfurt, although fans would have been hoping that this wasn't going to be interesting. It was going to be a done deal. The way that Frankfurt in particular give away the first goal will be incredibly frustrating for Dino Topmoller, the manager. It was an absolute gift and a mark of how this side are not comfortable in themselves at the back at the moment. It was something we saw again against Freiburg at the weekend in the Bundesliga. 3 times Eintracht took the lead. 3 times they were hauled back in. And the reason, to be honest, that they're playing in this game at all, because most would have expected them to top that Conference League group, which contained PAOK and Aberdeen, which they failed to do. They sort of limped through the group stages. USG struggled on the road in the Europa League group stages as well, failing to score at all on their travels. So those Eintracht defensive struggles will be a welcome relief to the visitors. But even still, you'd expect Eintracht to win this one. But they do have a way of subverting expectations this season. Keep an eye on it. And finally, to Poland, Legia Warsaw against Molde, 3-2 to Molde after the first leg. And at half-time in this first leg, Legia Warsaw looked down and out. They were 3 goals down after a blistering start to the game from the hosts. But credit where it's due to manager Costa Ranjaic, who made 4 substitutions at the break and another one before the hour mark, and saw his much changed side haul themselves back into the game. They'll fancy themselves as well now. From 3-0 down in the first leg, that would have been a moment to go, ooh, could they bring themselves back into it? At 3-2 down, I think Legia fancy themselves because they haven't lost at home since the end of October. In the group stages of this competition, Aston Villa and AZ Alkmaar both came to Warsaw and walked away with nothing. It is a veritable fortress. Molde know that they can cause problems, and they showed in the first leg, with Gulbranson in particular, seemingly sort of finding holes in this Legia backline at will. But Legia should have enough. They'll be backed by a vocal fan base who aren't allowed at away games, so weren't allowed at that first leg. But they'll get themselves over the line here, I think, and into the round of 16. So there you go. A little run through 9 games that should pique your interest. Pick a couple and get involved on Thursday night. Very excited to see what happens in all of those ones. I'm going to finish off with a few more questions from our Patreons. I'm going to start with this from Doug Leno, who says, who benefits most from hosting the second legs? As a fan, I'd always rather play home at second, where you know what needs to be done on the night. Feel like Ajax have a tough ask, knowing that they need a result in the Arctic Circle to go through. That said, I wouldn't fancy being Betis and having to go to Dinamo and play on the front foot. And is it all too much for Braga? Feel like losing 4-2 away would have been one thing, but overturning 2 goals in Azerbaijan feels too much. Crazy that Betis, Braga and Ajax are all in these situations. 3 sides who have shown up in European competition before, being given the runaround by some of the more far-flung UEFA teams. Respect to them all, perhaps unfair on Dinamo most of all. Yeah, and, as we said, the most successful of all the Croat clubs. So Dinamo, have had their moments in Europe as well. There's obviously that famous result against Tottenham where Mislav Orsic scored a hat-trick to overturn a deficit and turn it round. I think, from the top, you always benefit hosting the second legs, and that's why it's done in this order. It's done so that the teams who finish second in the Europa League have that home advantage in the second leg, and in the round of 16 to come, the teams who win their group will get home advantage in the second leg as well, as a kind of, here you go, you've earned this, and that's therefore a benefit. AC Milan might argue differently. They might say that after a 3-0 win over Rennes in their first leg, that game is done and dusted, and I'd agree, which is why I didn't feature it in those games to watch section. But yes, I think for more evenly balanced ties, you want that second leg on your own patch in order to try and turn around a game that's probably been taken away from you a little bit. And I think that's it. You look at someone like Sparta Praha, and you go, okay, so they went to Galatasaray. They'll be gutted to have conceded a late winner to Mauro Icardi. But generally, I think that they'll look at that and think, well, we're 1 goal behind going into our home second leg. That's a nice place to be. And I've heard it said before that, I can't remember by who, but going down 1-0 after an away first leg is basically like being level at halftime in a one-off game. And I think I just about agree. So that's the advantage, I suppose. If you can run it up and run up that scoreline in the first leg, then fine. But unless you can do that, having to go away in the second leg always feels like a relatively severe disadvantage. And bear in mind that without away goals, the second leg has the potential for an extra 30 minutes of gameplay and penalties. And for someone like Marseille, for example, who I think this game could end up going all the way, are the fans going to be the difference over those extra 30 minutes when the legs are starting to go and potentially in a penalty shootout as well? Yeah, I'd say so. So, yeah, I think you'd always rather have the second leg at home. Jake Wiegman says, who's in the most trouble manager-wise? Eintracht or probably Ajax? They've seemed to hit the skids once again. Could they be into a third manager once again? To be honest, both, if they're knocked out. I would have said Gattuso last week, but he's already gone. So he's already out of this conversation. Topmoller's credentials at Eintracht, I think, are really starting to be questioned at this point. But I think that Ajax are at the most risk, because I think if Ajax lose this, then Van Skip is done. They're too far off the pace in the league for that to be considered a risk. And this competition was perhaps the great hope that they could get something out of this season, finish a dreadful season with a bang and some silverware. If they crash out in this fashion, I can't see him surviving. So he's probably in the most immediate danger. But considering where Eintracht are in the table and the distance to the top 4, I'm going to say that Topmoller would also be very much on the back foot if they were to go out in this one. Let's go to Luke Shaw, who says, after Milan dispose of Rennes, who are they hoping to be drawn against in the next round? Is it simply a matter of avoiding the big two, or are there some other awkward matchups they don't want as well? I mean, yes, first of all, you want to avoid Leverkusen and you want to avoid Liverpool. Probably the most entertaining and playing the best football side in the continent in Leverkusen, and then Liverpool just being Liverpool, having that depth, that ability, and this kind of narrative fueling them. Both sides having a narrative fueling them, that it feels like it's going to be the manager's last season there. Definitely at Liverpool, probably at Leverkusen, could be a swap. We'll see. But when you kind of come into that element, you're going, who else do you want to avoid? Milan can't do this because they can't play against a side from their own federation in this draw. I think you want to avoid Atalanta because they've been sensational this season, quietly going under the radar. I've seen a lot of the talk around this competition and people saying, who can win the Europa League? And the chat has always been, okay, it's Liverpool or Leverkusen. And then there's a little bit of discussion around Milan. And I'm sort of sitting here going, is everybody sleeping on Atalanta, who are having a sensational season and who are really starting to come into their own once again under Gasperini after a couple, or last year was very much an off season. Does feel like they're really cooking again. But I do think that from a Milan perspective, the other team they want to avoid is Rangers. They're flying under Philippe Clement, and Ibrox for a second leg. We just talked about the fact that these group winning teams will have the second leg at home. It's had this sort of mesmeric power in Europe over the last couple of years where teams have really struggled to get going there. Milan are obviously a better side than Rangers, but of all the teams that you want to avoid, I think they're the other one, aside from the big two, in inverted commas, that you definitely want to stay away from if you can. Now, if it was a choice between Leverkusen, Liverpool, or Rangers, you take Rangers all day because the other two sides are, I think, in a slight league of their own. But I think if you're just looking at sides you want to avoid, Rangers would probably jump out at me there as well because of what Ibrox has done to very, very good sides over the last couple of years in Europe. And then finally from Jamie Cowie, he says, not the ranks encourages gambling, nor would be personally responsible for any profit or loss. But if you had to pick 3 bankers and 1 realistic for an ACCA out of this week's games, who would your picks be and why? I don't encourage it, but if you wanted some things that I think are going to happen, there's both teams scoring, which I think your 3 bankers would be Bødo, Glimt and Ajax, Marseille and Shakhtar, Qarabag and Braga, and then the wild card there is probably Dinamo Betis, because I think anything can happen in that game. And if you're looking for kind of games that will have winners, I think Sporting beat Young Boys in Lisbon. I think Ludogorets beat Servette. And I think that Legia beat Molde. And then I think the wild card on that one is Benfica to beat Toulouse. Now, a draw is good enough for Benfica. So maybe that slightly tempers it, considering they scored that late goal last week. But I think they have enough. And Toulouse are a weird side in almost every aspect. Benfica should have enough to see them off. So there'll be my 3 and 1s for both teams to score and 4 teams to win. Good luck if you decide to put them on, but that's not on you. That's very much on you. And with that, I think we're going to call UELtras to a close. Tried to keep it a little bit faster this week, a little bit more of a breathless run through the things you need to be watching. I know that these come out on the morning of the games. There's a lot of content out from the Champions League last night, just in terms of helping you prep for what's going on tonight, getting into your Thursday spirit and getting into the 2 best and most exciting club competitions across Europe. I've been Jack Collins. This has been UELtras on Ranks FC. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching. If you're on YouTube, thank you so much for listening. If you are a patron, really do appreciate you. And a reminder that you can get involved if you are watching on YouTube with the Patreon community by clicking the link in the description. We'd love to have you as part of it. Thanks so much. Take it easy. Peace.